Good evening. It's October, the most wonderful time of the year, and that means it's time to read some spooky stories to get ready for Halloween. And to that end, I have compiled a list of 5 of my favorite ghost stories to talk about today. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. I just wanted to let you all know that in addition to talking about books and being a writer, I am a musician, and I've started a Bandcamp page with my new music project, which is called Owl Blinking. I'm going to put the link in the description down there. It's largely electronic music that is drone-based and a little bit ambient, kind of a dark ambient feel. I'm into that kind of stuff. So if you are also like dark ambient music, electronic music, drone music, check out Owl Blinking on Bandcamp. I'd appreciate it if anyone would follow me there and see what I've got going on. Now, on to the stories. My number one choice for great ghost stories for Halloween is by the master of ghost stories himself, M.R. James. M.R. James is considered one of the first and best people to really extensively develop the ghost story as a genre. He's Victorian, and his stories are a little bit musty by today's standards, a little bit tame. They're kind of drawing room ghost stories, but this is a collection of them, and I like them a lot. I think they're good. The one I'm going to select today is called "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to Ye, My Lad." And that is about a professor who goes down to a seaside holiday on the shore, and while he's there, he finds this metal whistle. He blows it into the wind, and it's spooky, and then it summons something to him. I like this one because it's got a really good atmosphere to it. All these stories are going to have this in common. They're all very atmospheric. The coastal setting, wandering along the beach at kind of twilight, seeing things in the distance that you're not quite sure what they are, the wind, the ghostly sound of the whistle across the wind, and then the exciting climax of the story, which I won't spoil for you. I think it's one of his more exciting stories and one of his better ones. So, "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to Ye, My Lad" by M.R. James is my number one pick. Number 2 is by the Irish ghost story writer J.S. Fanu. This is a collection of his work, and the story I'm choosing from him is called Squier, Tobys' Will. It's about 2 brothers, one kind of ugly and mean and deformed a little bit, and the older one, whose name is Scroop, and then the younger one, Handsome Charlie, who are fighting over their father's will. And Handsome Charlie ends up getting the inheritance through some not too scrupulous means, and Scroop dies being very resentful and bitter about this. And let's just say that Handsome Charlie's duplicity comes back to bite him in the end of the story. I think it's another great kind of Victorian era, old-fashioned feeling ghost story. Lots of, the squire holed up in his mansion being afraid of what's going on. It's got butlers and servants. It's really a good kind of Victorian-style ghost story. If you like those older styles, it's very enjoyable. Squier, Tobys' Will by J.S. Fanu. Very good. Next, I have an author who was a big influence on H.P. Lovecraft. It's Algernon Blackwood, famous for his nature horror stories. And this is a Penguin collection of ancient sorceries and other weird stories. They're all good. I could have picked any one of these as my story for Algernon Blackwood. His most famous story is called The Willows, and they all kind of have in common that people go out into the wilderness and nature and find horrible things there and find the horror of how immense and powerful the natural world is. The one I'm going to choose is called The Glamour of the Snow, because I just like the setting of it a lot. They're all, largely interchangeable, and they have the same basic plot. But The Glamour of the Snow takes place in an alpine village where a writer is trying to do work, and he ends up getting kind of seduced into the cold, snowy blizzard wilderness by this kind of phantom woman who draws him out into the snow. And I like that, again, it's the atmosphere. I like the feeling of being snowblind and not being able to see very far in front of you, this kind of chilling, magical ice crystals all through the air. It gives the world a more ethereal quality, and I think it really adds a lot of good depth and atmosphere to the story. It makes you really feel sort of the same emotions the characters are feeling. So I like that one a lot. Like I said, all of Algernon Blackwood's stories could easily qualify. They're all very good, and so I recommend reading him. Algernon Blackwood, The Glamour of the Snow. Number 4 is by Ambrose Bierce, and it's called The Eyes of the Panther. Bierce was not really primarily a horror writer or a ghost story writer, but I like this story a lot. All of his stories, a little bit like Blackwood, are kind of a frontier horror feel to them. They're all kind of out in the wilderness, because that's where he lived his life and what he did. So this story, The Eyes of the Panther, involves a woman who is in a log cabin out in the middle of nowhere. Her husband has gone off to hunt for the evening. She's alone with the baby in the cabin, and she sees these eyes through the window watching her. And I love this story because, again, it's atmosphere. He really evokes that feeling of fear where you're out in this isolated place. Maybe you've got the shelter of a cabin, which is good, but you also got the light on, which means that you're visible by everyone on the outside. It kind of makes you vulnerable and a target, and you can really feel that, feeling conspicuous and feeling like you're being watched and not knowing what's out there in the darkness that could come and get you. So that's one of my favorite of Ambrose Bierce's stories, and it's one of the most chilling. I think it's really got a good horror quality to it. You really kind of feel the fear that someone would feel in that situation of being alone and isolated in the wilderness and not knowing what's out there. So Ambrose Bierce, The Eyes of the Panther, is my number 4 pick. The last one may be stretching the definition of a ghost story a little bit, but I wanted to include it because I think it's a really interesting story and I really like it. It'll stick with you. It's by Shirley Jackson, who did Haunting of Hill House and who did We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which are both great books. She also did short stories. The Lottery is her most famous one. I've talked about her before on this channel. In the collection that includes The Lottery, there's another story called The Demon Lover. So my number 5 pick is The Demon Lover. And The Demon Lover it's a very psychological story. It's very ambiguous. It's unclear what happens. But I interpret it as a ghost story. It's about a woman on her wedding day. She's about to be married to someone named Jamie Harris. And she's trying on her wedding dress, and she's drinking coffee, and she's getting ready, and she starts to feel very apprehensive, and she doesn't know where Jamie is, and she starts going to look for him, and she can't find him, and everyone's very dismissive of her concerns, and they don't seem to think her opinion is important. And she goes and looks for him, and looks for him, and looks for him, and then I won't tell you what happens in the end, but you can easily interpret this as a ghost story, as I interpret it, but there's other ways to interpret it as well. I like the ambiguity of it. I like that you can bring your own interpretation to it, and have different readings depending on what you're interested in or how your mind works as a reader. And the thing I like about Shirley Jackson's stories is, again, there's some atmosphere here. There's a real feeling of tension and suspense. You don't know what's going to happen. You can feel that the protagonist is very upset. But I like the ambiguity. This is true of all of her stories. You never really know what's going on. It's all very under the surface, and it might just be in the character's head, or it might be really going on. And I think she's great at that kind of writing, and a little bit more modern than the other writers on this list. I should also note that the character Jamie Harris, or James Harris, the title of the collection of The Lottery is The Adventures of James Harris as well. And James Harris is a figure out of Scottish folklore who features in a lot of ballads, and they tend to have a supernatural tinge to them. So there's always this kind of uncanny, uneasy, eerie feeling going on in her stories. You never really know what's going on. And I think that's a really good example of her at the peak of her writing when she did a really good job. So my number 5 pick is Shirley Jackson, The Demon Lover. So there you have it. I've run through them very quickly, but I don't want to give too much about the plot because I don't want to spoil the endings for people. They're all fairly short stories. You can read them. So if you're looking for something spooky to read for Halloween, those 5 stories are great. I might come back next week and do another 5 stories if I can find 5 other good ones that I want to talk about. But I definitely will do something Halloween themed for next week as well, because it's coming up on my favorite holiday. So there you have it. I've been Logan Albright. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful and spooky Halloween season, and I'll be back with you next week. See you soon.